Spring break is the beacon of freedom for every college student, a week-long hiatus from essays, exams, and lectures. Like many of my peers, the allure of sandy beaches, relentless sunshine, and the promise of adventure drew me to a small, seemingly idyllic coastal town. Little did I know, this spring break would etch a memory so terrifying it would haunt me for the rest of my life. The journey to the coast was filled with laughter, anticipation, and the blaring sounds of summer hits. My friends and I had rented a quaint cottage a stone's throw away from the beach, tucked away at the edge of town. It was perfect, or so we thought. The first few days were blissful. We basked under the sun, surfed the lukewarm waves, and indulged in the local nightlife. The town, though small, was vibrant, teeming with tourists and locals alike, all eager to soak in the joyous chaos of spring break. However, our carefree existence was soon shattered. It started with whispers, hushed tales that floated through the town like a chilling breeze. Stories of tourists disappearing, never to be seen again. Dismiss it as unfortunate accidents, or the reckless. Stories of tourists disappearing, never to be seen again, dismissed as unfortunate accidents, or the reckless abandon of partygoers wandering off into the night. We paid them no mind, attributing them to urban legends or the overactive imaginations of the locals. Then came the night that changed everything. A night that started like any other, with the promise of laughter and revelry. We were walking back to our cottage, the moon a sliver in the sky, when a dense fog rolled in from the sea, swallowing the town in a thick, opaque blanket. Visibility was reduced to mere feet, and a sinister silence enveloped us, the usual nocturnal sounds of the town eerily absent. It was then that I felt it. A presence, unseen but overwhelmingly oppressive, watching us, following us. I could hear the soft, measured steps mirroring ours, stopping when we stopped, moving when we moved. My heart raced, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I mentioned it to my friends, but they laughed it off, attributing it to my overactive imagination, fueled by the eerie fog and the spooky tales we had heard. But the feeling of being watched persisted, growing more intense with each step. As we neared our cottage, I dared a glance over my shoulder and saw it, or rather, the absence of it. A shadow, darker than the night itself, a void where the fog seemed to part. It was formless yet distinctly human-shaped, and it was coming closer. Panic took hold, and we broke into a run. The sound of our footsteps thundering in our ears, the shadowy presence a constant companion just beyond the edge of sight. We reached the cottage, slamming the door shut behind us, panting and trembling with fear. We dared not speak of it, each of us retreating into our own minds, trying to rationalize what we had experienced. The night passed in fitful sleep, plagued by nightmares of shadowy figures and unseen watchers. Morning brought no relief, only a palpable sense of dread that lingered like a bad taste. The town, once vibrant and welcoming, now felt oppressive, the smiling faces of the locals masking an unspoken terror. We decided to leave, cutting our spring break short. The town, with its sun-drenched beaches and whispering waves, had lost its allure. As we packed our belongings, a deep sense of unease settled over me. The feeling of being watched had not abated. If anything, it had grown stronger, more insistent. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed, that the shadowy presence from the night before had attached itself to us, an unseen parasite feeding off our fear. The further we got from the town, the more oppressive the sensation became, until it was all-consuming. It was then that tragedy struck. A tire burst, sending our car careening off the road and into a ditch. The world spun, a chaotic blur of motion and noise, before coming to a sudden, jarring halt. When I regained consciousness, I was greeted by a scene of devastation. The car was a mangled wreck, and my friends, I was the only survivor. The investigation ruled it an accident, a tragic end to a spring break adventure. But I know the truth. The shadow that followed us, the unseen presence that haunted us, had played its part in our demise. I alone escaped with my life, but not unscathed. I carry the burden of that night, the memories of my friends, and the knowledge of the unseen horror that lurks in the shadows. The town remains a picturesque destination for unwary tourists, its dark secrets buried beneath layers of sand and silence. But I will never forget, and I will never return. For I know that the shadow waits, patient and hungry, for the next unwary soul to venture too close. Spring break, a time of joy and freedom, had become my prison, a reminder of the horror that lies just beyond the veil of our understanding, in the shadows we refuse to see.
The concept of a never-ending spring break might sound like paradise to most college students, but for me, it became a harrowing experience that I can never escape. It all started when my friends and I decided to spend our spring break in a remote cabin nestled deep in the woods, far away from the typical beachfront festivities. Our aim was to disconnect from the world and enjoy a week of tranquility and bonding. Little did we know we were stepping into a nightmare that would blur the lines between reality and terror. The drive to the cabin was long and winding, with the dense forest canopy blotting out the sun, casting an eerie shadow over our spirits. We joked and laughed, oblivious to the silent watchers hidden among the trees. The cabin itself was a rustic, charming structure that seemed to whisper secrets of a bygone era. It was isolated, the nearest neighbor miles away. Exactly what we had wanted, or so we thought. The first 2 days passed in blissful ignorance. We hiked, cooked over an open fire, and shared stories under the stars. But as the third day dawned, a dense mist rolled in, shrouding everything in a ghostly veil. With the mist came a palpable shift in the atmosphere, as if the very essence of the woods had changed. It started with small, unexplainable occurrences, objects moving on their own, fleeting shadows in the corner of our vision, whispers carried on the wind that seemed to call our names. We tried to laugh it off, attributing it to our imaginations running wild in the secluded setting. But the unease among us grew, a silent acknowledgement that something was very wrong. Then, on the fourth night, the true horror began. We discovered that our phones, our only link to the outside world, were dead, despite having been charged. The cabin, once a cozy refuge, felt like a trap, its wooden walls closing in on us. That night, as we huddled together, the boundaries between our world and something far more sinister began to blur. We heard footsteps outside, circling the cabin, a relentless predator stalking its prey. The door rattled, the windows shook, as if an unseen force sought entry. We dared not move, barely breathed, as fear took a vice-like grip on our hearts. The night stretched on, a torturous eternity, until the footsteps faded with the first light of dawn. But with the new day, there was no relief. The mist remained, thicker than ever, and we realized we were not alone in these woods. Something, or someone, was with us, watching, waiting. Our attempts to leave were futile. Paths that should have led us back to the main road twisted and turned, leading us in circles back to the cabin. It was as if the forest itself was alive, ensnaring us in its grip. Panic set in. The realization that we were trapped in a nightmare with no end. Days and nights merged, a perpetual cycle of fear and despair. We started seeing things, visions of horrors too unspeakable to describe, specters of the past that haunted the woods, reliving their tragedies and ensnaring us in their torment. Our sanity frayed. We turned on each other, accusations and paranoia replacing the camaraderie we once shared. The cabin, once our sanctuary, had become a prison, each room holding its own shadowy secrets, whispering madness into our ears. In the end, I was the only one left. My friends, consumed by the horror, or perhaps taken by the woods themselves, vanished into the mist, leaving me to face the eternal spring break alone. I write this as a warning, though I know not if it will ever be found. The cabin in the woods is a place of unspeakable terror, a gateway to a nightmare that offers no escape. The spring break that promised freedom and joy became my unending torment, a cycle of fear and madness from which there is no release. The woods keep me here, a part of their twisted domain, forever caught in the spring break that never ends.
Spring break, a time most college students equate with reckless abandon and fleeting pleasures, presented a different allure for me. Driven by a desire for solitude and introspection, I chose to spend my week off in the desolate beauty of an abandoned lighthouse on a remote island off the coast. The idea was simple: to disconnect, to find peace in isolation, and to perhaps, in the silent embrace of nature, discover something profound about myself. This journey, however, unearthed a chilling truth that solitude can sometimes be a gateway to unfathomable horror. The island was a speck of land, forgotten by time, where the abandoned lighthouse stood tall against the backdrop of crashing waves and stormy skies. Its history was a tapestry of tragic shipwrecks and tales of a lone keeper who vanished without a trace. These stories, while foreboding, only fueled my fascination. Upon arrival, the lighthouse cast an imposing shadow, its structure weathered by years of neglect and the relentless assault of the sea. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of salt and decay, the silence a heavy, oppressive blanket. Despite this, the place felt alive, as if it breathed with the ebb and flow of the tide. The first night was an exercise in true isolation. The sound of the sea was a constant companion, its roars and whispers seeping through the cracks in the lighthouse walls. It was during these hours, in the grip of the island's eerie tranquility, that I first heard the voices. Soft at first, they were mere whispers carried by the wind, indistinct and formless. I convinced myself they were the product of my isolation-induced imagination. But as the days unfolded, the whispers grew louder, more urgent, forming words that called out in the darkness. They spoke of loss, of despair, of a longing so intense it pierced the veil between the living and the dead. It was then that I discovered the lighthouse's grim secret. The keeper, whose disappearance had become the stuff of local legend, had not left of his own volition. He had been consumed by the lighthouse, trapped within its walls, a prisoner of his own despair. His voice was the loudest among the whispers, a beacon of sorrow that echoed through the empty halls. Driven by a mixture of fear and an inexplicable sense of duty, I began to explore the lighthouse, delving into its darkest corners, searching for a way to free the keeper's spirit. The deeper I went, the more the boundaries between past and present blurred, until I found myself lost in a labyrinth of memories not my own. The climax of my ordeal came on the last night of spring break, under a blood-red moon. I found the heart of the lighthouse, a chamber untouched by time, where the keeper's essence was strongest. There, amidst ancient maritime relics, I performed a ritual of release, using the tales of the sea as my guide. The lighthouse trembled as the keeper's voice rose in a final, agonized crescendo before dissipating into the night. As silence fell, a profound sense of peace settled over the island, the oppressive atmosphere lifting like a curse being broken. When I left the island, the lighthouse was no longer a prison of despair, but a beacon of hope, its light restored, shining brightly across the sea. The voices were gone, their echoes a reminder of the thin veil between solitude and madness, between the living and the dead. Spring break, intended as a journey inward, became a journey beyond the veil, a confrontation with the ghosts of the past. I returned to the mainland changed, carrying with me the knowledge that we are never truly alone, that every place has its stories, and sometimes those stories yearn to be told.